He was just trying to earn a few dollars playing guitar on the street. She was just trying to make it through another day without her daughter. But when he started to play that specific song, her world stopped cold. The melody was one she had only ever heard in her own home, written by her late child. And the young musician had no idea the devastating connection he was about to unlock. This is the story of Marcus, a 22-year-old street musician just trying to get by, and Evelyn Reed, a grieving music executive who lost her daughter. Two strangers whose paths were never supposed to cross. But in that one moment of music, a single song written in a lost bedroom would threaten to unravel them both or offer a fragment of peace. The question is, how did that song ever leave that room and find its way into a stranger's hands? For Marcus, the guitar was an escape, a way to translate the chaos of a fractured upbringing into something beautiful. He'd been playing on that same downtown corner for 8 months, his open case collecting just enough in loose change and crumpled dollars to keep his power on and his fridge from being completely empty. He didn't play the typical busker hits. He played originals. Fragments of melodies he'd pieced together in his tiny studio apartment, songs about loss he couldn't quite name and hope that felt too fragile to speak out loud. He was good, not just passable, but genuinely, hauntingly good. The kind of good that made people pause their phone conversations, that made couples stop walking and just listen for a moment before dropping in a $5 bill. But talent alone doesn't pay rent in a city that never sleeps. Every day was a calculation. 2 hours of playing could mean a grocery run. 4 hours might cover the utility bill. He was treading water, and the fatigue was starting to seep into his fingers. On the other side of the city, in a sleek high-rise with a view that cost more than Marcus made in a year, Evelyn Reed was navigating a different kind of exhaustion. 2 years prior, her 17-year-old daughter, Chloe, had been killed in a car accident on her way home from a songwriting workshop. Chloe wasn't just a music-loving teen, she was a prodigy. Her bedroom was a makeshift studio, covered in lyric sheets and chord charts. She had notebooks filled with songs, each one a raw, unfiltered piece of her soul. Evelyn, a senior vice president at Aurora Records, had been her daughter's first and most ardent fan, her fiercest protector. She had kept Chloe's world small, guarding her talent from an industry she knew could chew up and spit out the vulnerable. No demos were circulated, no YouTube uploads. The songs were for them, a private language of love and dreams. After Chloe's death, the music didn't just stop for Evelyn. It became a landmine. The pop anthems her label pumped out felt hollow and cruel. The sound of a guitar from a neighbor's apartment could send her into a panic attack that left her breathless. She took a leave of absence, then another. The company she helped build moved on without her, the charts filling with new names while she sat in Chloe's perfectly preserved room, playing the voice memos her daughter had left on her phone, each one a fresh cut of grief. Her friends called it complicated grief. Her therapist called it traumatic bonding. Evelyn just called it survival. Going out in public was a monumental task. But today, the golden hour of a Thursday evening, a force she couldn't explain pulled her from her apartment. She needed air that didn't smell like memory. She walked without direction, a 52-year-old woman in a black coat moving through the crowds like a ghost. Back on the corner, Marcus was losing the light. The flow of commuters had dried up. His fingers ached and the take in his case was disheartening. He had one song left in him, a newer one. It was different from his usual stuff. He found the chord progression scribbled on a piece of sheet music left in a second-hand guitar case he bought at a pawn shop 6 months ago. The paper was faded, tucked between the old lining and the wood. There were just 8 chords written in neat, looping handwriting and a single, stunning line of lyric. "The silence after the symphony is the loudest sound I know." That line had haunted him. He'd built a whole song around it, a slow, aching ballad about emptiness and echo. He had no idea who wrote it. He told himself it was abandoned, a piece of creative debris. He'd made it his own, poured his own loneliness into its structure. It was his secret weapon, the song that always, without fail, made people stop. And he needed them to stop now. He took a breath, adjusted the capo, and let his fingers find the opening arpeggio. The first few notes, clear and resonant, cut through the evening's low hum. He closed his eyes, as he always did, and began to sing. He didn't see the woman in the elegant coat freeze 10 yards away as if she'd walked into an invisible wall. He didn't see her hand fly to her mouth. He didn't see the color drain from her face, leaving her dark skin ashen under the streetlights. He was in the music. And the music was now flooding into Evelyn Reed, not as a song, but as a tsunami of the impossible. Those chords, that specific aching progression Chloe had invented, that line, her asterisk line, the one she'd written the night after her first heartbreak, whispering to her mother that it was about the echo of love, not the loss. A song that had never left their home, a song that had died with its author. Until this moment on a dirty sidewalk from a stranger's guitar. The world telescoped down to that sound. Every other noise, the traffic, the chatter, the city's heartbeat, muffled into a distant roar. Her legs wouldn't move. Her breath came in sharp, ragged pulls. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a sound alike. This was a theft. A violation so profound it momentarily overrode her grief with a white-hot spike of sheer panic. How? The question screamed in her mind, silent and desperate. How did you get that? Her professional instincts, long dormant, fired like a circuit breaker flipping back on. This wasn't just her daughter's melody. It was her intellectual property, her legacy. And it was being performed for pocket change by a man who had no right. As Marcus hit the bridge, pouring his entire struggling heart into the performance, Evelyn Reed took one shaky step forward, then another, tears streaming down her face, not from sorrow now, but from a furious, protective rage. She was no longer just a grieving mother. She was a music executive who had just found her daughter's stolen work, and she was headed straight for him. Marcus finished the final, lingering chord and opened his eyes to the sight of a woman standing directly before him, tears cutting silent paths through her makeup, her body trembling with something that looked far beyond ordinary emotion. For a second, he thought it was just a powerful reaction to his music. It happened sometimes. He gave a small, tentative smile, a performer's acknowledgement, but her expression wasn't one of moved appreciation. It was devastation, fused with a laser-focused intensity that pinned him to the spot. "Where did you get that song?" Her voice was low, scraped raw, but it carried over the street noise with the force of a command. Marcus blinked, his smile fading. I wrote it," he said, the lie he'd told himself for months coming out automatically, defensively. "You did not write that song." Each word was a shard of ice. "That is my daughter's song, Chloe Reed. She wrote it. She is gone, and you are playing it." Her hand, still shaking, pointed at his guitar as if it were a crime scene. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Marcus's mind went blank, then scrambled. The pawn shop, the sheet music, the handwritten line. "Wait," he stammered, lowering his guitar. There's a misunderstanding. I found some music in a case. I thought it was just old, abandoned." "What case?" Evelyn stepped closer, her grief now sharpened into prosecutorial precision. "Where?" The story tumbled out of him in a disjointed rush. The pawn shop on 8th Avenue, the beat-up vintage guitar case he'd bought for $40 because it was all he could afford, the single, beautiful page of sheet music tucked away inside. He described the handwriting, the specific lyric. As he spoke, Evelyn's face underwent a terrifying transformation. The anger didn't soften, it calcified into something colder, more certain. "You bought her case." It wasn't a question. "After she died, her father, we didn't know what to do with her things. He took some items to sell to just make it easier." The admission seemed to cost her, her voice breaking for the first time. "That case was one of them. It was hers, and you have her unpublished, copyrighted work." The word copyrighted hit Marcus with the weight of legal finality. This wasn't just an awkward moment, this was a potential lawsuit. His meager earnings, his entire fragile existence, flashed before his eyes. "I didn't know," he pleaded, his own voice tight. "I swear to God I didn't know. I just saw the music and it was so good. It felt like it was meant to be found." For a long moment, Evelyn just stared at him, her chest heaving. The crowd had thinned, but a few people lingered, sensing drama. Then she did something unexpected. She didn't scream. She didn't call the police. She sank slowly onto the bench beside his performing spot, the fight seeming to drain out of her, replaced by a bottomless, weary sorrow. "Play it again," she whispered, not looking at him. "What?" "Play it again, please." Confused, terrified, Marcus obeyed. His hands were unsteady now, and the first chord came out slightly muted. But he played it again, the song that was no longer his. This time he watched her. She didn't cry. She listened with her eyes closed, her head bowed as if attending a sacred service. When he finished, the silence between them was profound. "You changed the bridge," she said quietly, opening her eyes. "The original resolution was in C major. You used a suspended fourth. It's more haunting your way." Marcus was floored. You can hear that." "I've spent my life in recording studios," she said, a hollow laugh escaping her. "I was her first editor." She looked at him then, really looked at him, not as a thief but as a musician. "You're very good. The arrangement is sparse, effective, it honors the melody." The professional critique was automatic, a ghost of her old self breaking through. Then the pain flooded back. "But it is hers, and you've been performing it publicly. Do you have any idea what that means?" He didn't. But over the next hour, sitting on that bench as the city darkened around them, Evelyn Reed explained it to him. She explained copyright law, intellectual property, publishing rights. She explained that even an unpublished work found on a piece of paper was still protected, still owned by her daughter's estate, by her. She explained that every time he played it, he was technically infringing. That she could, with a single phone call to her firm's legal department, have him served with a cease and desist that would not only stop him from playing the song, but could seek damages for every dollar he'd ever earned with it in his case. Marcus listened, his heart sinking into his stomach. His dream of using his music to climb out of poverty was crumbling because of a $40 case and a page of music he thought the universe had gifted him. "What do you want me to do?" he finally asked, his voice small. Evelyn was silent for a long time. "I want you to come with me," she said. "Where?" "To my home. I want to show you who she was. I want you to see the room where that song was actually written. And then, I don't know." She stood up, suddenly looking every one of her 52 years and impossibly tired. "But you don't get to play her heart without seeing where it lived." It was the last thing Marcus expected. This wasn't legal action. It was a pilgrimage, a demand for witness. Terrified but with no real choice, the threat of legal annihilation hanging over him, he packed his guitar and followed her. Evelyn Reed's apartment was a world away from his own. It was spacious, minimalist, and quiet as a tomb. The walls were adorned with modern art, but his eyes were drawn to the framed photos. A vibrant, smiling girl with intelligent eyes and a fierce grin. Chloe, at a piano, with a guitar, laughing. The reality of the loss became a tangible presence in the room. Evelyn didn't speak as she led him down a hallway. She paused outside a door, her hand on the knob, gathering a strength that seemed to drain from her by the second. Then she pushed it open. Chloe's room was not a shrine frozen in time. It was a workshop paused mid-thought. A guitar leaned against a stand. A keyboard was covered in a fine layer of dust. Books on music theory were stacked on the desk, and everywhere on the walls, pinned to a giant corkboard and open notebooks, were sheets of lyrics and musical notation. In that moment, Marcus's remaining doubt vanished. The handwriting on the walls was identical to the handwriting on his precious sheet music. This was the source. He was standing in the cathedral. Evelyn walked to the desk and picked up a small black notebook. She handed it to him without a word. He opened it. Inside, in that same looping script, was the full version of the song he'd been playing. The lyrics were complete, telling a story of adolescent heartbreak so precise it took his breath away. And at the bottom, a date. It was written over 3 years ago, long before he'd ever found it. A copyright notice was even scribbled in the margin. Chloe Reed had known what she had. "She was going to change everything," Evelyn whispered, gazing at the room. And then a red light, a truck that didn't stop, and it was just silence. She turned to Marcus, her eyes glistening. "So you understand now. This isn't just a song you found, it's a piece of her, and you've been broadcasting it to strangers for loose change. The guilt was immediate and crushing. I'm so sorry, he said, and for the first time he truly meant it. It wasn't just sorry for the legal trouble, it was sorry for the violation. I'll never play it again. I'll destroy the sheet music. Evelyn took the notebook back, holding it to her chest. That's not enough, she said, her tone shifting again back to the executive. The infringement has already happened. The song is in your head, it's part of your set. The genie is out of the bottle. She paced slowly, her mind visibly working, analyzing the problem from all angles. A simple cease and desist doesn't unhear it. It doesn't restore control. And it does, she trailed off, a new, dangerous thought taking shape. It doesn't what? Marcus asked, dread coiling in his gut. She stopped and looked at him, a spark of her old, formidable self igniting in her eyes. It doesn't give her any credit. If this song is going to be out in the world, it will be under her name, Chloe Reed, not as some anonymous busker's original. She took a deep breath. I want you to record it properly, in a studio, with full production, and we will release it as Chloe's song featuring your performance. Marcus's brain short-circuited. You want me to record it after just threatening to sue me. It's not a want, it's a condition, Evelyn stated, her voice regaining its steel. This is the remediation. You will help me bring her work to light the right way. You will be the interpreter, not the author. In exchange, I will grant you a limited royalty-based license for your performance, and we will drop any legal claims. She was building the deal in real time, her instincts taking over. This is how you make it right. You give her back her voice. It was an impossible offer, a nightmare and a dream twisted together. Recording in a real studio was everything he'd ever wanted, but to do it as a penance, to surrender all claim to the song he'd come to think of as his emotional anchor, to have his big break be an apology. The conflict must have been plain on his face. Think about it, Evelyn said, her tone leaving no room for immediate refusal. But not for too long. I have the contacts. I can book time at Aurora's studio by the end of the week. This happens on my terms or it happens in court. Your choice. She handed him a crisp business card. Evelyn Reed, Senior Vice President of A&R, Aurora Records, the name of one of the biggest labels in the country. The magnitude of the situation finally crashed over him. He was no longer just a busker in a confrontation with a grieving mother. He was in a business negotiation with a music industry powerhouse. And the currency was his talent, her grief, and a dead girl's song. As he left her apartment, the signed sheet music feeling like a lead weight in his pocket, Marcus knew his life had just been bifurcated. Down one path, a lawsuit he couldn't possibly win, financial ruin, and the end of his music. Down the other, a chance to record in a professional studio, but only by agreeing to become a living ghostwriter, channeling a soul that wasn't his. He had 72 hours to decide, but the world, it seemed, was not going to wait that long. Because unbeknownst to either of them, a clip of their initial, tense confrontation on the sidewalk had already been captured on a smartphone, and it was starting to go viral. The video hit the internet with the force of a lightning strike. A 60-second clip, shaky but clear, titled "Grieving Mom Confronts Busker Over Stolen Song." It showed the tail end of Marcus's performance, Evelyn's tear-streaked face as she approached, and the intense, whispered exchange. "Where did you get that song?" The uploader's caption framed it as a cut-and-dried case of artistic theft, and the internet, always hungry for a clear villain and a wounded hero, devoured it. Within 12 hours, it had 1 million views. Within 24, it was national news. Marcus awoke to a barrage of notifications. His social media, once a quiet space for a few dozen followers, was flooded. Thousands of comments, some were sympathetic, "You didn't know, man," but most were a torrent of rage, "Song thief, vulture, exploiting a dead girl's pain for coins." His face, captured in guilty-looking confusion, was now a meme. The address of his regular busking corner was posted in forums, with calls to go and let him know what we think of thieves. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from numbers he didn't recognize, reporters, talk shows, podcasters. He turned it off, his hands shaking. The legal threat from Evelyn was one thing. This was a trial by public opinion and the verdict was in. He was guilty. Evelyn, meanwhile, was dealing with a different kind of fallout. Her phone rang from numbers she did recognize. Old colleagues, industry reporters, the head of Aurora Records himself. The narrative had painted her as a righteous, grieving lioness, but it had also ripped the bandage off a wound she'd kept private. The story of Chloe's death, which she had fiercely controlled, was now public domain. News articles recited the facts of the accident. They called her a former music executive, emphasizing her leave of absence. The sympathy was there, but it felt invasive, re-traumatizing. And then came the other calls. Lawyers, not hers, offering to represent her in a slam-dunk civil case against Marcus. Producers offering to fast-track a tribute album for Chloe. It was a circus, and her daughter's memory was the center ring. Amidst the chaos, a new player entered the scene. A documentary filmmaker named Leo Chen, known for intimate portraits of artists, reached out to both of them separately. His pitch was disarming. He wasn't interested in the viral spat. He was interested in the song itself, its strange journey from a private bedroom to a public sidewalk, and the two people now bound by it. He proposed a simple, observational film, document the process of them recording the song together as they had tentatively agreed. He argued it would give them control of the narrative back. To Marcus, it sounded like a lifeline, a chance to show he wasn't a monster. To Evelyn, it sounded like a way to ensure Chloe's story was told with dignity, not reduced to a tabloid headline. Warily, independently, they both agreed. This decision, however, ignited a new firestorm. When news leaked that Evelyn Reed was not suing the busker but collaborating with him, a segment of the public turned on her. Comment sections filled with accusations. She's exploiting her daughter's death for a comeback. She's letting the thief profit. This is all a publicity stunt for a new label project. The clean, sympathetic narrative had fractured, and now both of them were in the crosshairs. The first day of filming with Leo was in Evelyn's apartment. The tension was palpable. Microphones picked up the uncomfortable silence as Marcus re-entered Chloe's room, now with cameras witnessing his awe and guilt. Evelyn, under the gaze of the lens, became more formal, more like the executive, shielding her raw grief. It was Leo who asked the simple, devastating question that changed everything. "Evelyn," he said softly, camera focused on her, "you said her father sold the case. Can you walk us through that? How did it get from his hands to a pawn shop?" Evelyn stiffened. It was a part of the story she had glossed over, too painful to examine. Her ex-husband, David, had handled the physical dispersal of Chloe's things in the raw, brutal months after the funeral. They hadn't spoken much since. With the camera rolling, she called him, put him on speaker. His voice, weary and guarded, filled the room. Yes, he'd taken a box of items to a consignment shop, not a pawn shop. A place called Second Chances. The guitar case was in there. He'd gotten $100 for the lot. He hadn't looked inside the case's compartments. Leo's next question was to Marcus. "And you bought it from a pawn shop on 8th Avenue. Big Al's," Marcus nodded. Leo looked between them. "Those are two different businesses. So how did it get from a consignment shop to a pawn shop across town?" A slow, dawning horror began to spread in the room. The sheet music hadn't just been accidentally left in a sold case. The case had changed hands professionally. Someone, between the consignment shop and the pawn shop, had found the music, and that someone had either left it in the case or had tried to sell it separately. Evelyn's investigative instincts, honed by decades of contract scrutiny, kicked into overdrive. She and Leo, with Marcus trailing behind, became detectives. They visited Second Chances. The owner remembered the guitar case. He'd sold it a week after taking it in to a man who came in regularly buying old instruments and gear. He described him, a mid-level collector and flipper. They tracked the man down at a flea market. He was cagey but admitted he'd bought the case. And yes, he'd found the sheet music inside. He thought it was just junk, but the handwritten lyrics looked artsy. He'd actually taken it out and sold it separately, a week later to a different pawn shop, Big Al's, as a curiosity. He got $20 for it. The trail led them back to Big Al's. Al, a gruff man in his 60s, remembered the sheet of music. Yeah, the pretty songwriting. Some kid bought it, said it was inspiring. He pointed a thick finger at Marcus. That was you. But Leo, ever persistent, asked to see the shop's logbook for that period. Al grumbled but produced a tattered ledger. And there, next to the entry for the sheet music, was another line from earlier that same week, an entry for the purchase of a vintage guitar case. The buyer's name was listed. It wasn't the flipper from the flea market. It was a different name, paid in cash. But the date was telling. The case had been sold by Big Al's before the sheet music was ever brought in. The timeline was impossible. The music couldn't have been in the case when Al sold it, because the music was still with the flea market flipper at that time. The only conclusion was staggering. The sheet music had never been in Chloe's guitar case at all. It had entered the pawn shop separately as a single sheet, and it had been placed into the different second-hand case that Marcus bought weeks or even months later. It was a coincidence of astronomical proportions. Two relics of Chloe Reed's life, her case and her handwritten song, had traveled independent, parallel paths through the city's underbelly of second-hand goods, only to be united by chance in a purchase by a struggling musician. This revelation shattered Evelyn. The comforting, painful story she told herself, that her daughter's most private work had been carelessly lost in the dispersal of her things, was false. The song had been separated from Chloe's possessions deliberately and much earlier. But by whom? The question hung in the air, more haunting than any accusation. Had Chloe herself given it to someone, sold it? The pristine, copyrighted copy was in her notebook at home. The sheet music was a draft. Why was it out in the world? The pressure cooker of the documentary, the viral fame, and the emotional detective work finally erupted in the recording studio. Aurora Records had granted Evelyn time in a pristine, state-of-the-art studio. It was her old kingdom, but she felt like a ghost. Marcus, terrified and out of his depth, was struggling under the bright lights and the pressure of a veteran sound engineer. They were there to record Chloe's song, but every take felt hollow. Marcus was trying to mimic the feel of his street performance, but in the sterile environment it sounded thin. Evelyn, listening in the control booth, grew increasingly frustrated. "It needs more feeling," she said over the intercom, her voice tight. "You're treating it like a cover. It's not a cover, it's her heart. You need to find it again." Marcus, sweating under the headphones, snapped back. "I found it on the street when I was hungry. That's the feeling, not this perfect room." He took off the headphones. "You want it to sound like she would have done it. She was a teenager in her bedroom, not a pop star in here." The argument escalated, years of industry polish crashing against raw, street-born authenticity. Leo's cameras captured every second. Finally, Evelyn stormed into the live room. "You don't get to tell me what my daughter would have wanted," she shouted, years of suppressed grief and professional fury boiling over. "And you don't get to tell me the only real thing I've ever played is a stolen heirloom," Marcus shouted back. They stood facing each other, breathing heavily, the microphones capturing the silence. Then Evelyn's anger collapsed. Her face crumpled, and she didn't just cry, she wailed, a deep guttural sound of loss that had been trapped for 2 years. She slid down the wall of the soundproofed room onto the floor. Marcus, his own anger evaporating, stood helplessly. Then slowly he picked up his guitar. He didn't put the headphones back on. He just sat on the floor a few feet from her, and he began to play. Not the song, just a gentle improvised chord progression, a simple wordless lullaby. Evelyn's sobs gradually subsided into hiccuping breaths as she listened. It was Chloe's song. It was a new one, a song for right now, for a broken mother and a scared young man and the impossible mess between them. When he finished, the studio was silent. Evelyn looked at him, her makeup ruined, her eyes red and exhausted. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "It's yours if you want it," Marcus said softly. "No strings, no copyright, just a song." It was the first truly kind, non-transactional exchange they had ever had. And in that moment, the dynamic between them shifted irreversibly. They weren't adversary and thief, or executive and asset. They were two people shipwrecked by the same piece of music. Leo, watching from the booth, knew he had his film's climax, but the real world wasn't done with them. As they left the studio that night, raw and emotionally spent, they were ambushed by a pack of entertainment reporters. The questions came rapid fire, not about music but about the scandal. Evelyn, is it true you're launching a label with this song? Marcus, what's your cut of the profits? Is this whole thing a stunt? They pushed through, shell-shocked. The narrative had escaped again, twisting their painful, fragile détente into a crass business venture. As they retreated into a waiting car, Evelyn looked at Marcus, a new resolve hardening in her eyes. They're going to turn her into a product, she said, her voice quiet but fierce. And they're going to turn you into a puppet. We can't let that happen. Marcus nodded, feeling the same protective surge, though he didn't know what to protect first, Chloe's legacy, Evelyn's grief, or his own crumbling chance at a career. They had begun this journey on opposite sides of a legal battle. They were now allied against a world that wanted to consume their story. But the clock was ticking. The public awaited the release of Chloe's song. The documentary was nearing its final cut. And somewhere out there, the truth of how that sheet of music really escaped its home still waited to be found. A mystery that threatened to redefine everything they thought they knew about the girl at the center of it all. Allied against a narrative they could no longer control, Evelyn and Marcus made a decision that would shock the industry. They pulled the song from the studio. They canceled the formal release through Aurora. Instead, they invited Leo and his documentary crew to a location that made the sound engineers blanch, the pedestrian bridge in the park where Marcus often played. At golden hour, with the city skyline as a backdrop and the ambient noise of life as their only track, they set up a single, high-quality microphone. This would not be a produced record, it would be a document. Evelyn addressed the small crowd that gathered, her voice steady. This song was written by my daughter, Chloe Reed. This man, Marcus, found it by a twist of fate. He gave it a voice when hers was silenced. Tonight, we play it for her and for anyone who has ever lost a piece of their heart. No labels, no edits, just the song as it was always meant to be heard, alive and in the air. Marcus played. This time, free from the sterile pressure of the studio, the performance was transcendent. It carried the ache of the street, the warmth of the gathering dusk, and a newfound reverence that flowed between him and Evelyn, who stood silently beside him, listening with her eyes closed. Leo's cameras captured it all. The raw, single-take performance, the reverent silence of the crowd, the tears on many faces. He uploaded the full, unedited 10-minute segment to the documentary's official channel that same night. It went viral all over again, but this time, the narrative had been set by its creators. The headline was simple: The Bridge Session, A Song Comes Home. The response was a tidal wave of genuine emotion. The crass business speculation evaporated, replaced by thousands of stories shared in the comments from people who had experienced loss, who had found solace in music, who saw in Evelyn and Marcus's fractured alliance a mirror of their own need for connection. The documentary, titled The Loudest Silence, premiered at a festival 3 months later. It wasn't a true crime story about theft. It was a meditation on grief, art, and the invisible threads that connect strangers. It won an award. More importantly for Evelyn, it gave Chloe's life and talent a permanent, dignified record. She could finally look at her daughter's image on a screen without flinching, seeing her celebrated, not pitied. The mystery of the sheet music's journey, however, still gnawed at her. The documentary had ended with the question unanswered, a haunting note. The resolution came from an unexpected source. A young woman named Anya, a former classmate of Chloe, saw the film. She reached out to Evelyn, her message hesitant. She had something to confess. 2 weeks before the accident, Chloe had been part of a secret, informal songwriters' circle that met at a downtown cafe. They would trade lyrics and chord sheets for feedback, a pact of trust among young artists. Chloe had brought a draft of the song, the very sheet to share. In the emotional aftermath of Chloe's death, the group disbanded. Anya had kept the physical sheet, a painful memento. A year later, moving apartments and overwhelmed by memories, she had made the impulsive, regretful decision to sell a box of old books and papers to a second-hand store. Chloe's song was in that box. Evelyn listened to this story, not with anger but with a profound sense of closure. The music hadn't been stolen. It had been shared. It had traveled from a cafe of dreaming teenagers, through a friend's grief, into the city's circulatory system of discarded objects, and finally onto a pawn shop shelf where a searching young man would find it and give it breath. It was the most heartbreaking and beautiful chain of events imaginable. She thanked Anya and even invited her to visit Chloe's room to see where the song began. The aftermath of the documentary's success created new realities. Marcus was no longer an anonymous busker. He was offered a legitimate recording contract, not just for Chloe's song, but for his own original work. The deal, negotiated fiercely by Evelyn in her return to form as an executive, was unprecedented. It gave him creative control, a fair royalty split, and in a clause that made industry lawyers shake their heads, a commitment to fund a yearly scholarship in Chloe Reed's name for underprivileged young musicians. Marcus moved out of his studio apartment. He bought his mother a car. But every Saturday he still played on his corner, his case open, now with a small sign that read, "Original music and one very special cover." Evelyn did not return to her old vice president role. She founded a small, independent production company called Loudest Silence Records. Its mission was singular: to find and nurture raw, authentic talent with an emphasis on mental health resources and ethical contracts. Her first signing was Marcus. Her second was Anya, Chloe's friend, who had her own portfolio of stunning songs. The company office was filled with photos of Chloe, not as a ghost, but as a muse. The relationship between Evelyn and Marcus deepened into something resembling family. He called her on Sundays. She helped him navigate the bewildering world of royalties and publishing rights. He taught her how to make his mother's pepper soup, the kitchen filling with laughter and the occasional culinary disaster. For Evelyn, the agonizing silence of her apartment was finally, truly filled. Not replaced, but joined by a new, living harmony. 2 years after that evening on the bench, Marcus's debut album was released. The final track was The Silence After the Symphony, credited to Chloe Reed featuring Marcus. The liner notes contained a photo of Chloe and the story of the song's journey. The album went platinum. At the release party, held not in a club but in the community music school that was the first recipient of the Chloe Reed Scholarship, Marcus performed. When he finished the set, he called Evelyn to the stage. The crowd, which included Anya, Leo the filmmaker, and dozens of scholarship students, fell silent. "This woman," Marcus said, his voice thick, "saw me first as a thief, then as a project, and then as a person. She trusted me with the most precious thing in her world. She taught me that music isn't about ownership, it's about connection. Evelyn, you gave me a career, but more than that, you gave me a purpose." He turned to the audience. "And you all need to know the next album is already being written, and half the proceeds are going straight into this school." Evelyn, wiping her eyes, took the microphone. "He's still a terrible cook," she said to warm laughter, "but he's an exquisite musician. My daughter, my Chloe, she wrote that song about the echo of love. I spent 2 years hearing only the silence. Marcus, you made me hear the echo again. Thank you." The final surprise, the one that would bring the story full circle, arrived in a plain manila envelope at Loudest Silence Records 6 months later. It was from the curator of a university archive specializing in American music. A collector had passed away and bequeathed a collection of mid-20th century sheet music. Among the boxes, the curator found a newer, hand-written item. It was another song, definitively in Chloe's handwriting, titled Golden Hour. A note with it, written by the deceased collector, read, "Found at a flea market, 1999. Beautiful, unknown, filed under mysteries." The curator, having seen the documentary, recognized the hand. Evelyn held the new sheet, a previously unknown piece of her daughter's soul, a song about the fleeting beauty of evening light. She didn't cry. She smiled. She called Marcus immediately. "We have a new project," she said. Another one came home. The story of Marcus and Evelyn is not about a single act of kindness, but about a series of choices to see past the initial, easy story. It's about a woman choosing to confront rather than retreat, and then choosing to collaborate rather than destroy. It's about a man choosing to listen, to apologize, and then to dedicate his skill to a legacy not his own. Their lives were transformed not by the coincidence itself, but by what they decided to build in its wreckage. They channeled a global moment of scrutiny into a lasting force for good, funding futures for young artists, and in doing so, found their own broken pieces fitting together to make something entirely new. The song that started it all still plays on streaming services, a quiet, enduring duet between a girl who dreamed and a man who gave those dreams a second life. And if you walk through that park on a Saturday evening, you might just hear it played live, floating on the twilight air, a permanent echo of love where once there was only silence. So what does this story leave us with? Not just a remarkable coincidence, but a map of how grief and art can intertwine to create unexpected redemption. It asks us a difficult question. What do we do with the pieces of other people's hearts that we sometimes accidentally come to hold? Do we claim them? Do we return them? Or do we, as Marcus and Evelyn learned, honor them by building something new around them? Their journey began in conflict, fueled by pain and accusation, but it found its resolution in collaboration, in the quiet, stubborn choice to listen to the human being behind the label of thief or executive, griever or stranger. The legacy of Chloe Reed is no longer a private memory. It is a living force. It's in the chords played by a scholarship student who otherwise couldn't afford a guitar. It's in the raw, honest music now being released by Loudest Silence Records. It's in the simple, weekly ritual of a man on a street corner, playing his heart out, forever connected to a girl he never met. This story proves that art never truly dies. It simply waits for the next custodian, the next voice brave enough to carry its melody forward. And in that transfer, in that act of stewardship, both the giver and the receiver are transformed. We live in a world quick to judge, to assign blame, to consume a viral moment and then move on. But the deeper narrative, the one that unfolds in the quiet after the headlines fade, is where real change lives. It's the choice to ask a second question, to offer a hand instead of a verdict, to see a piece of lost beauty not as something to own, but as something to protect and pass on. That is how we turn isolated moments of pain into enduring symphonies of connection. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of the unexpected ways our lives can intersect and heal, then we have more stories like this to share. Our channel is dedicated to uncovering the profound human connections hidden in everyday life. By subscribing, you'll join a community that believes in looking deeper. Hit the like button if this message moved you, and share it with someone who needs to hear that no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. We read every comment and love hearing how these stories connect to your own experiences. Tell us below, have you ever encountered a piece of art, a song, a book, a painting, that felt like it was meant specifically for you? How did it change your path? Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. May you always have the courage to hear the echo of love in the silence and the wisdom to add your own voice to the song. Until next time.